know a lot about history. You've been a presidential candidate yourself. What are the stakes this year?
So this is a moment of reckoning, not only for the United States, but as you rightly point out, the international community also has a lot at risk in the outcome of this next presidential election here. It reminds me a little bit of when then President-elect Obama asked me to be Secretary of State. And he said, look, our economy is in a terrible Great Recession, which of course it was back in 2008 and 9. I have to deal with the economic crisis, but we also have problems around the world. We have neglected our leadership and our alliances in the prior 8 years. Well, I think you just have to quadruple that to understand what President-elect Biden might be facing. And so I think there has to be a full court press, as we say, both on the economy at home, dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic, because I don't think it will be over by the next inauguration, making sure that we have a strong response to people's losing jobs as well as healthcare, because in our country, as you know, healthcare is often attached to employment, something that we are trying to change. And then abroad, we're going to have to quickly move to try to regain leadership and rebuild our alliances and make clear to our competitors and adversaries that, you know, the vacuum is no more, that the United States is going to resume a position of global leadership and bring people together around common threats, whether it be climate change or the global pandemic.
Foreign policy usually doesn't play as big of a role in presidential elections. And I wonder what role you think it will play this year, whether it will be any different because of the situation that we're in.
Well, I think it should, and I hope it will. We have some very serious challenges internationally, and I think the press and the public should be demanding answers from the incumbent, Donald Trump, and the challenger, Joe Biden. So just take a quick look at what we face. We face this global pandemic. We're going to eventually, I hope after only it's proven safe and effective, have a vaccine or more than one vaccine. Then we're going to have to figure out how, working together in a cooperative way, the world can distribute and deliver that vaccine globally so that we really do tame the virus. We're going to have to deal with the continuing interference in our election by Putin and the Kremlin. This is an ongoing threat to our own democracy, but also to other democracies. We need to have a stable, consistent policy toward China, the most consequential of our global relationships. I don't blame the Chinese for filling the vacuum left by the incoherent and inconsistent policies of the Trump administration. But we can't permit China to dominate the Pacific region and beyond and try to substitute its own power and influence for a rules-based global order.
History has shown that an international event like COVID-19, you really have to go back to the Spanish flu to think of something that consequential, can have huge geopolitical implications. You've talked a bit about how we should respond to it, but in a geopolitical sense, where do you see the opportunity that could be seized, but also what's the danger? Could this accelerate history in a way that many have said, which would actually accelerate the relative decline of the United States?
We've seen the failure of governments to deal with the pandemic. And that is a wake-up call for everyone to understand that we need to both take a hard look at public health processes and institutions within countries, but also internationally. I thought it was a grave error for Donald Trump to attack the World Health Organization and to act as though he could pull the United States out of it, something that is more complicated than he lets on. We should be buttressing the World Health Organization. We should be buttressing Gavi, the vaccine institution that has been set up internationally. We should be having intense diplomatic conversations with health experts, logistics experts, and others about how we are going to finally get to a safe and effective vaccine, or perhaps even more than one, and then manage the distribution of it so that we try to bring the world together around defeating the pandemic, not permit the vaccine nationalism that is taking place right now.
China's come up several times in this conversation. The Trump administration has been quite outspoken, has made this a huge priority, particularly in the last weeks. They point to the past, saying that the U.S. has ignored China for too long, and now we need to stand up. For the next president of the United States, it seems like we have an attitude, but we don't have a strategy. What could that strategy contain?
So you see with China, they're playing the long game. And as I say, you can't blame a country for acting in its own self-interest. We can question ourselves for not being more effective in how we deal with China's new, more aggressive, ambitious approach. So I think it's important to stress that the United States is an Asian power, a Pacific power. I had those conversations even when I was Secretary of State with my Chinese counterparts, that we will and intend to protect the South China Sea from colonization by Chinese military interests, that we stand with our friends and allies in Asia, East Asia, South Asia, in their efforts to protect their territorial integrity, that we should get back into the business of competing for hearts, minds, and infrastructure in different parts of the world, because it does make a difference. And basically, with Trump as president, we are absent. We are absent symbolically, and we are absent substantively. So I think there's a lot we can do to rebuild our presence. We also should not shy away from continuing to speak out about human rights in China, about the Uyghurs, about the crackdown in Hong Kong. I think there's a real audience within China and around the world for the United States regaining its voice when it comes to human rights. So there's a real opportunity here, Fred, that I think that a Biden-Harris administration would quickly seize to try to get our relationship with China back on a steadier, more predictable course and reassert America's standing and leadership in Asia and beyond.
You said America's future is bound up in the future of Europe. Does that remain the case now? Are we just being nostalgic looking back at the transatlantic relationship? Or what role do you think it has in this very uncertain future we're going into?
I think one of the great advantages the United States historically has had, which unfortunately we have squandered in the last 3.5 years, is our network of alliances. And there is none that has been more consequential and long-lasting than the Atlantic Alliance. And I believe strongly that democracy is under attack around the world. Governance has not lived up to what people living in democracies have every right to expect. The aggressiveness of Russia, as we've seen it in Georgia, Ukraine, the kind of activity we're seeing currently in Belarus, and the kind of threats that Russia has posed to democracies from the Baltics to the Balkans. There is a great deal of work to do between Europe, the United States, and Canada in once again strengthening our democratic alliance and taking a hard look at where we have fallen short, trying to support, as the EU has tried to do, the democratization within countries, which, as we've seen in Hungary and Turkey and elsewhere, even NATO members, has been a bit disappointing, to say the least. So yes, the transatlantic alliance should remain at the core of American foreign policy vision and objectives. And I would hope that one of the first things internationally that a new administration does is to reaffirm the centrality of that Atlantic alliance.
How do you view what's happening right now in the country and civil society? And how does that interact with our international role?
Well, I think that this is a moment of great moral reckoning over structural racism in our country. And I'm hopeful that real change will occur. And it is a very serious internal threat to our way of life and to our unity. But as Dean Acheson said all those years ago, it also impacts America's image and leadership abroad. The Russians under the Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation under Putin have always tried to highlight racial strife and inequities in the United States as a way of undermining our aspirations for democracy, our values about moving toward a more perfect union. They've taken any opportunity they could to try to paint a much darker picture of the United States. So I think both, and first, probably most importantly, we've got to do better internally ourselves.
I'm so glad you drilled down a little deeper on Iran. And I think a lot of our viewers and Americans haven't paid as much attention to the Chinese-Iranian recent agreement, which really does seem to be a change, does seem to be different. Do you go right back to JCPOA if you're a newly elected President Biden? How do you manage that? Is there a lot of low-hanging fruit you can just pick up, or has the world moved on where you need a totally different strategy?
I think it's important for the United States to try to not only rejoin the agreement, but to try to put that lid back on the Iranian nuclear weapons program and keep it firmly on while trying to continue preventing a nuclear arms race with the Saudis or the Emiratis or the Egyptians or whoever else thinks that if Iran has a nuclear weapon program, they should have one too. And I think the best way to do that is to rejoin the agreement. Now, at this point, I don't know whether Iran would be receptive to that. I think they may have moved on. And remember, there was always a conflict between the political and clerical leadership in Iran and obviously the military leadership as to whether or not to put that lid on the nuclear weapons program under the agreement. So again, I don't think we would know unless we resumed intensive diplomacy. But I don't think it's in Iran's interests to have continuing sanctions against it, even with Chinese support. It's not economically enough if the rest of the world does renew pressure on Iran. So it would have to be explored.
You were the Secretary of State. What's the status of our soft power in the world, and what role does it play in this dangerous landscape?
I think we have squandered our soft power. I don't think that the United States has the influence that we should have in global debates or in how we're viewed, particularly by young people around the world. I think we have to rebuild our soft power. I like the phrase smart power because I think it combines the elements of the hard power that is necessary in defense with the soft power that is often viewed as part of development and diplomacy. But we've got to smarten up our global presence and once again try to influence people and events through the power of our example, and as opposed to the example of our power. That is an old cliche, but it's really an important one to keep in mind. You know, we have to set the standard for a rules-based global order, and it is very much in America's interest, but also in the world's, that we assume that leadership position again.
Thank you so much for this enormously rich conversation.